Okay, a slightly different shot than we learnt on the last video, but I've still kept the title as the Chipping Fundamentals Plus, because the plus, you may have spotted there, was an increased level of wrist action, and some of you will feel more comfortable chipping with wrist hinge. That's the feedback I've had last week as a result of the video. Some of you will not, but I'm going to give you the basics of it. The key reason why I've left the word fundamentals in is because they don't change. We still need a shallow angle of attack. We still need not to take divots or break the ground, and we need to know, if we're going to incorporate wrist hinge, how to do that so that you can start to rely on it. And perhaps you'll prefer a little bit of wrist hinge. It feels a bit more artistic, creative, it's got a bit more flow to it, and it gives you a little bit longer to play the shot. So let's get stuck into the things we have to do if we want to incorporate wrist hinge, and then hopefully you can give it a go and improve your game. So from head on, let's have a look at what goes on. We still need not to take a divot. That's the key to a good short game, remember. We still need a shallow angle of attack. So when you look at me straight on here, when I play this shot, I'm likely to have the shaft fairly vertical. It doesn't really matter if I have it a little bit forward at this stage, because I'm going to put into this movement some wrist hinge this way. Now, it doesn't really matter how much wrist hinge I put in. We can play around with that and some of the variables, but that means I've got to get all of the wrist hinge back out by the time I get to the golf ball. One of the most common failures we see with this shot is that wrist hinge goes into the swing and then it stays in, or the majority of it stays in, and as we get towards the ball and drive the club, we're still left with a lot of shaft lean, more shaft lean than we have bounce on the club, and therefore we're likely to take divots and get a little bit stabby into the shot. If we put any wrist hinge we put in, whether it's a little bit, yeah, we have to get rid of it, or whether it's more, we have to get rid of it. So I want you, when you start practicing this shot, to feel as though you're trying to get the shaft back to vertical at the point of impact. Okay, so just have a little play around with that. However much wrist hinge you put in, try and get that shaft back to vertical by the point of impact. It'll be unloading the shaft through the ball. Then just move forward with your practice there, as I did, and start to take some practice swings where you don't take divots, but you do hear the sole of the club brushing the ground like this. You can hear it as I'm doing it, and there's no divot being taken here. Okay, and when we get it right, it should look something like this. Okay, again, no divot, but let's just run that one through back in slow motion, and we'll see that on the way back there was more rotary action of my body as the wrists hinged here, and on the way down the wrists unhinged to present the sole of the club to the ground. And then because of that unhinging process, that continued, and the club head overtook my hands at the bottom of the swing and ended up the other side of my hands on this side. So if you find yourself finishing this swing with your hands held and the wrist hinge not out of the swing, then you're doing something wrong, basically. Here's a really good exercise that I would like you to start doing if you're going to incorporate wrist hinge into your chipping action, because it'll give you a really good feeling of how the wrists work and how we get rid of that dreaded shaft lean. So I'm going to ask you to chip one-handed, believe it or not. So if you're right-handed, with your right hand only, towards the bottom of the grip here, and I want you to just start to think about playing this shot with one hand. Hinge the wrists, unhinge the wrists. You can hear the club skidding at the bottom on the ground. There's still no divots coming out here. Also notice while I'm doing it how straight my right arm stays during this movement, because that's the best way that I can control and extend the flat spot of this swing, if you like, here. The more I hinge my right arm, and actually I would do that in a normal swing, don't forget, here that right arm would fold up, but now the club is going to be on a more vertical descent. I'm going to have to extend my arm and unhinge my wrists, and there's too many variables, you don't need them. So keep that right arm nice and straight during this movement, and you'll get a really different sensation about how shallow you can come into the ball. Then hit a few shots. Okay, get some confidence once you've brushed the grass a few times. Put the ball in the middle, gently hinge and gently release. Okay, ball the club skidded into the ball and off it went. Once you've done that, it's not too big a leap of faith to put the other hand on the club, but feel as though your right hand is the one in control. That's the one doing the work here. Put the left hand on to guide it, but you can see my right arm is still staying relatively straight, and now this movement should become a lot easier for you. Let's have a look down the line and see what this kind of looks like with wrist hinge now. Different to the stiff-wristed approach, we're going to move away from the ball a little bit. This allows the wrists to start working. When they're too high here and braced, they don't work as fluently as they should do. So move yourself away just a little bit from the ball from your stiff-wristed approach here, and you can see now that as we go back in the wrist hinge, the club wants to be on a much more rotational basis. So I'm going to want you to encourage that. I want you to feel as though your chest and your whole body is involved in a turning action here around, so we can actually start to skid the club through impact. So, ball in the middle again, set up. You'll see as I go back, and this will be a medium amount of wrist hinge I'm going to put in here, and as I get rid of the shot, you'll see how much flight and height we get on this shot because of the wrist hinge. Okay, so this is a 50-degree wedge, and that went quite high because wrist hinge will add dynamic loft. It adds speed. Speed applied to loft gives height. So that's why you're seeing the ball go a little bit higher. But some of you will feel happier with that, and the fact that you've had wrist hinge makes the swing longer, gives you a little bit more time to operate, and doesn't feel quite so sort of static and inflexible as a stiff-wristed chip might do. Horses for courses, and try and experiment with all the different types of shot here. Little bit of wrist hinge will give you a slightly lower flight. A lot of wrist hinge will give you a little bit more flight and a bit more time. So again, have a go. Let's have a go at one with slightly less wrist hinge this time. I'll hit the ball slightly lower. Again, a little bit further away than I was last week. Just going to have a little soft hinge as I turn and push. Okay, so you can see a much lower flight that wants to run out. This time of year you might want that on the wet greens because you don't want the ball to stick like glue when it lands. So it gives you a few more tools to play with around the green and experiment with. The key to all of your short game shots is this skidding, this no divot taking impact. And then once you get the hang of that, we can start playing around with it. So, final section, rule breaking. Okay, you may have got the hang of all of this now, but all good short game is to do with the angle of attack, the skid into the golf ball if you want. And it's just about achieving that in any way you can to get yourself a short game that is reliable. So, the two main methods of shallowing your angle of attack we've covered. Okay, one is that if we hinge our wrists, we have to unhinge them so the club gets closer to the ground prior to impact and therefore is very shallow through the golf ball. When we did our no wrist hinge swing, we kept the club low to the ground like a putter, so we can also have a shallow angle of attack through the golf ball. That means there's a little bit of leeway here for breaking the rules. We can go old school as long as we appreciate we have to have a shallow angle of attack. So we could actually have the ball backwards of centre, shaft leaning forward like mad, weight on the left side. All things which I've said don't go anywhere near, but as long as we shallow the angle of attack through the ball and get the club to skid, we're going to be able to execute that shot very effectively. Just have a little look at the effects on the follow through if you choose to adopt this method. Okay, if I to keep this club close to the ground, in other words have a long low flat spot on the swing, I'm going to have to let my left arm detach from my body, my left shoulder's rising all the time to stop that club burying into the ground. I'm having to lift everything up to shallow the angle of attack. When I unhinge my wrists, that's what does the shallowing, is getting the club closer to the ground as I unhinge. Now you'll find that the left arm stays close to my body and the unhinging continues, and that's achieved a shallow angle of attack. So let's have a look at those quickly before we wrap it up for the day. Let's go old school, ball at the back, shaft leaning forward like mad, weight forward, all things that I don't like to see people do, but it can work as long as we lift up our left shoulder, extend our left arm, we can keep the club close to the ground and achieve a really good chip shot. Here we go. Okay, you can see by the shaft lean being there at impact, the loft of the club has come way down. That looked like a little 7-iron chip and run. So somebody like Shane Lowry, who uses one club for all of his short game shots, instinctively finds the combination of loft that he wants with an action to keep the thing shallow, hence he's got a good short game. If we go back to the hinging, you'll see that that'll be slightly different in terms of how it finishes. So we're going to put the ball in the middle now, we're going to invite a wrist hinge into our movement and we're going to get rid of it, and that'll show it. Look at this follow through. Okay, very different flight on the ball considering it's the same club, but you can see my left arm stayed close to my side as I've unhinged through the ball. So fundamentals plus, this video has been about incorporating wrist hinge and now giving you all the factors that you need to start experimenting and realizing that it's all to do with this 6 inches at the golf ball. Getting that shallow through the ball will give you a short game. So go and have some fun with it, come and ask for help if you need it, and find your own solution to this problem. Your scores will come down, you'll have more fun. Just one thing before you go, and I know you're going to enjoy this. What happens when you have to chip off something like this lie I'm on here? Have a look and it will show you that the principles still hold fast. This is the video we've been waiting for. We're no longer on a nice manicured approach with short, crisply cut grass. We're on your worst nightmare of a bear lie. It's rock hard. The greenkeepers have taken an inch of turf out and left with soil and sand. It's just a nightmare. I can't putt it because I've got a lip. And there'll be situations like this in your games where you are forced into playing a shot that you are not looking forward to. But be strong, stick to your principles. A nice shallow angle of attack will get the job done. Every part of your brain is going to be wanting to do the opposite. It's going to be wanting to present the leading edge, try and nip it off the top. And I'm not saying that won't work, but it just reduces your margin of error on the strike. So I'd like to see you here have a nice, long, sweeping putting stroke, and you're going to try and skid the club, much as we've off grass, into the golf ball to give you the best chance of a good result here. Okay, so here we go. I've put the ball just slightly forward of centre to encourage my skidding action, and I'm just going to lock my wrists and sweep the ball forward. Okay, no one would know that I had that shot from a horrible lie, and we got the skidding effect with no divot whatsoever. If I put the leading edge into play, we're going to get the typical result that we see too often, I'm afraid, in these situations. Ball back, leading edge forward. Now get the angle of attack gets steeper here, and a big cushion of soil and sand was taken by the leading edge, got between the club and the ball, and we've duffed it a yard ahead of us here. We could also play a hinging shot from this position, as long as we stick to the rules and we have a nice shallow angle of attack again. So I'm going to move a little bit further away from the ball, gently hinge and release the club. I can hear the sole contacting underneath the ball with an extended area of impact, and we can play a tiny little wrist hinge chip shot here for a similar result. Okay, so they're nothing to be scared of. Trust the technique. Hopefully that demonstrates to you that steep angles of attack don't work on any surface whatsoever, and you can't get more punishing than this. Good luck, and if you need any help, you know where to find us. I look forward to hearing that your chipping has improved.